Cole latched the stall, the bolt sliding home with a heavy, final sound that echoed in the sudden quiet of the barn. The agitated mare settled on the other side of the door, her snorts a damp percussion against the wood. He turned, and the space that had felt cavernous a moment ago shrank to the size of a breath. My back was already against the rough-hewn rail, splinters digging faintly through the thin fabric of my shirt. He put a hand on each of my shoulders, his palms broad and warm, and the sheer solidness of him seemed to leach the panic right out of my bones. He didn't push, just held. His gaze, the color of wet earth after a rain, pinned me in place. "Steady," he said. The word was not a command, but a promise. A low, gravelly anchor in the spinning chaos of my mind. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. Steady. It was the last thing I felt. I had been back on my father's ranch for 6 weeks, and in that time, I had felt like a ghost haunting the edges of a life that was no longer mine, if it ever had been. The city had been my home for a decade, a world of concrete and anonymity where my anxieties could be neatly folded and tucked away. Here, under the vast, unforgiving Montana sky, there was nowhere to hide, especially not from him. Cole Anderson had been my father's foreman for the last 15 years. He was a piece of the landscape, as fixed and elemental as the crazy mountains that sawed against the horizon. When I was a kid, visiting for begrudging summer weeks, he was just a tall, quiet man who smelled of hay and leather. Now he was something else entirely. He was the keeper of my father's legacy, the silent judge of my inadequacy, and the focal point of a longing so sharp and persistent it felt like a physical ache in my chest. My father's death had been sudden, a heart attack that had taken him in the field. I inherited everything: the land, the debt, the herd of cattle, and Cole. The first few weeks were a blur of lawyers and paperwork. I walked through the house, my father's house, touching objects I hadn't seen in years, feeling no connection to them at all. I was an imposter in my own history. My plan was simple: stabilize the finances, find a reputable buyer, and retreat back to my quiet, manageable life. But then there was Cole. He moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. Every action had a purpose, from the way he mended a fence line to the gentle murmur he used to soothe a nervous horse. I started watching him. At first, it was a way to understand the workings of the ranch I now technically owned. I'd sit on the porch with my laptop, pretending to work, but my eyes would drift to the paddock where he was training a new colt, his body a fluid line of strength and patience. He rarely spoke more than a few sentences at a time. Mornings were a brief report over coffee. "Fence is down in the north pasture. I'll take care of it." Evenings were a simple nod. "Night, Leo." Yet, in his silence, I felt a current of awareness. He saw me. He saw my uselessness, my city-soft hands, the way I flinched from the sheer scale of the place. But there was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet, unnerving watchfulness. My internal monologue, a constant companion in the city, became a roaring torrent here. Every glance from him was dissected, every brief exchange replayed and analyzed for hidden meaning. When he handed me a mug of coffee, his calloused fingers would brush against mine, and the contact was like a low-voltage shock, a jolt of sensation in my numb existence. I'd spend the next hour replaying that fleeting touch, the rough texture of his skin against mine, the warmth he left behind. It was pathetic. It was consuming. The observation became an obsession. I learned the rhythm of his day. The pre-dawn quiet when he'd already be in the barn, the low rumble of the truck engine, the way he'd stand at the end of the day, one boot propped on the lowest rail of the fence, staring out at the land as the sun bled across the sky. He had a way of pushing his hat back on his head with his thumb, a simple gesture that somehow conveyed a world of weariness and resolve. I saw the fine lines around his eyes, etched there by sun and time. I noticed the way a muscle in his jaw would tick when he was concentrating. These were secrets I gathered, hoarding them like a miser. One afternoon, he found me struggling to replace a loose board on the porch steps. I had the wrong tools, the wrong angle, and a burgeoning collection of splinters. I didn't hear him approach. One moment I was alone, cursing under my breath, and the next he was there, a solid presence at my shoulder. He didn't say a word, just knelt, took the hammer from my clumsy hand, and with 3 efficient, powerful strikes, drove the nail home. He handed the hammer back, his knuckles grazing my palm. "Need to use your weight," was all he said before walking away. My hand tingled for the rest of the day. It was a simple act of help, of competence correcting incompetence. But my overthinking mind twisted it into something more. A lesson, a judgment, an act of infuriating, gentle pity. The tension between us was a living thing, a third presence in the quiet rooms of the house. It was in the shared space of the kitchen, where we'd move around each other in a careful, silent dance. It was in the long, drawn-out evenings when the only sounds were the ticking of the grandfather clock and the distant cry of a coyote. I felt stretched thin, a wire humming with a frequency only I could hear. Or so I thought. Then came the storm. It blew in from the west, a bruised purple wall of cloud that swallowed the mountains whole. The wind rose to a shriek, and the sky opened up. Rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. I stood at the window, watching the world dissolve, my anxiety a cold knot in my stomach. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the house into a deep, disorienting gloom. A moment later, the back door slammed open and Cole was there, dripping water onto the floorboards, his hair plastered to his forehead. He was breathing hard. "Generator won't kick on," he said, his voice tight. "We need to check the foaling barn. Daisy's close, and this storm will have her spooked." There was no question of me staying behind. We pulled on heavy rain slickers and fought our way through the wind and water. The world was a maelstrom of noise and chaos. Inside the small foaling barn, the air was thick with the scent of hay and animal fear. A single battery-powered lantern cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. Daisy, the pregnant mare, was pacing in her stall, her eyes wide and white. Cole moved to her immediately, his voice a low, soothing murmur that was somehow audible beneath the roar of the storm. He stroked her neck, his large hand a point of calm in her panic. I stood uselessly by the door, feeling like a child. "Grab that bucket and fill it with fresh water from the pump," he said over his shoulder, not looking at me. It was the first direct order he'd ever given me. I moved, grateful for the task, for the chance to be something other than an observer. We worked for hours. He showed me how to mix the feed, how to check Daisy's vitals, how to speak to her in a way that calmed her instead of frightening her more. He moved with an unhurried grace, his focus absolute. The storm raged outside, but inside that small, lantern-lit space, a strange pocket of peace formed around us. We were a team. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like I belonged there. The foal was born just before dawn, a slick, leggy creature that stumbled into the world as the storm began to recede. We watched, side by side, as Daisy began to clean her new baby. The lantern light softened the hard lines of Cole's face, casting a warm glow on his cheekbones. He looked exhausted, but there was a small, genuine smile on his lips. It transformed him. "My dad loved this part," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. My voice sounded thick in the quiet barn. Cole didn't look at me, his eyes still on the mare and foal. "He did," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "He'd sit out here for hours. Said it was proof that the world keeps turning, no matter what." He finally turned his head, his gaze meeting mine in the dim light. "He was proud of you, you know. The books you wrote. He kept the first one on his nightstand." My throat closed up. I hadn't known that. My father and I, we weren't close. We spoke on holidays, our conversations stilted and full of things unsaid. I always felt like a disappointment, the son who ran away from the land, who chose words over work. To hear that he was proud, it cracked something open inside of me. "I didn't know," I managed to whisper. "He wasn't a man for easy words," Cole said, and his gaze was so direct, so full of a deep, knowing empathy that I had to look away. But he felt things. Deeply. We fell silent. The only sounds the soft nuzzling of the horses and the drip of water from the eaves. The shared experience, the exhaustion, the raw emotion of the birth, it had stripped away our layers of caution. In that moment, he wasn't the foreman and I wasn't the boss. We were just two men in a barn at dawn, witnesses to a small miracle. I felt a profound and terrifying vulnerability. He had seen a piece of me I kept hidden from everyone, the grieving son who just wanted his father's approval. And he hadn't flinched. He had offered comfort in his quiet, steady way. The days that followed were different. The tension was still there, but it had changed its character. It was less about my anxiety and more about a shared, unspoken awareness. The air between us felt charged, humming with possibility. The small touches became more frequent, and I started to believe they weren't accidental. His hand would rest on the small of my back as he passed behind me in the kitchen. When he showed me how to properly hold the reins, he stood behind me, his chest pressed against my back, his arms around mine, his breath warm against my ear. My mind would go completely blank, all thought erased by the overwhelming proximity of him. I was in a constant state of heightened alert. Every sense was tuned to him. The scent of his soap when he came in from the fields, the way the late afternoon sun turned the tips of his brown hair to gold, the low cadence of his voice when he spoke on the phone to a supplier. I was drowning in the details of him, and the idea of returning to my sterile city apartment felt like a death sentence. This place, this hard, demanding, beautiful land, was becoming synonymous with him. I was falling in love, and it terrified me. This brings me back to the stall. It had happened the day after the storm's aftermath. Feeling a surge of misplaced confidence, a foolish need to prove I was more than just an observer, I tried to lead Zeus, my father's temperamental stallion, from the paddock to the barn. Zeus was a magnificent beast, all black muscle and simmering energy. He was my father's horse, and he tolerated Cole, but he had no patience for me. He'd spooked at a bird taking flight, rearing up, his hooves flashing in the sun. I'd stumbled back, losing my grip on the lead rope, my heart leaping into my throat. I saw a flash of my own mortality in his wild eyes. Before I could even process the fear, Cole was there. He moved between me and the horse with a speed and grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. He didn't shout. He just spoke a single, sharp word, and Zeus, after a tense moment, dropped back to all fours, his sides heaving. Cole led the horse into the stall, his movements calm and deliberate, betraying none of the adrenaline that was still coursing through my veins. And then he turned and cornered me, latched the door, put his hands on my shoulders, said that one word. Steady. I am here now. My breath is catching in my lungs. The scent of him, sweat, leather, and something uniquely Cole, fills my head. His thumbs are rubbing slow, soothing circles on my shoulders, a stark contrast to the intensity in his eyes. He's searching my face, and I know, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that he can see everything. He can see the fear, yes, but he can also see the yearning that has been my constant companion for weeks. You could have been killed, Leo, he says, his voice a low vibration that I feel more than hear. There's no anger in it, just a raw, ragged edge of something that sounds terrifyingly like fear. His fear, for me. I'm fine, I say, but my voice is a thin, reedy thing. A lie. No, you're not. His gaze drops to my mouth, and then back to my eyes. The space between us is electric, a vacuum pulling us closer. My carefully constructed walls are crumbling, turning to dust under the weight of his stare. All the weeks of watching, of wondering, of aching for something I couldn't name, it all culminates in this moment. The air is too thick to breathe. I don't know what I'm doing. I whisper, and the confession is about so much more than the horse or the ranch. It's about my life. It's about this impossible, unbearable feeling for the man standing in front of me. I don't belong here. A flicker of something unreadable passes through his eyes. His hands tighten on my shoulders, not painfully, but anchoring me. Maybe you do, he says, his voice rough with an emotion I can't decipher. Maybe you just haven't let yourself see it yet. He leans in, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I don't. I can't. I am frozen, held captive by the hope that is blooming, wild and reckless, in my chest. This is it. The tipping point. The world narrows to the few inches between us. His focus is absolute. When his lips meet mine, it's not a collision. It's a discovery. The kiss is slow, deliberate, a question asked and answered in the same breath. It's not the frantic, desperate kiss of a movie. It's something far more profound. It is firm and sure, the slight rasp of his stubble a startling, wonderful friction against my skin. He tastes of coffee and the clean, dusty air of the barn. His hands slide from my shoulders, one moving to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, while the other settles on the small of my back, pulling me flush against him. I gasp into his mouth, and he deepens the kiss, a low groan rumbling in his chest. My hands, which had been hanging uselessly at my sides, come up to grip his shirt, fisting the sturdy cotton as if it's the only thing keeping me upright. It is. I am unraveling. Every repressed feeling, every lonely night, every moment of quiet desperation is dissolving in the heat of his mouth. This is not a mistake. It feels like the first true thing that has happened to me in years. It feels like coming home. He breaks the kiss, but only to rest his forehead against mine. We're both breathing heavily, our breath mingling in the small space between us. I keep my eyes closed, trying to memorize the feeling of his solid form pressed against me, the strength in the hand at my neck, the simple, unbelievable fact of his presence. Leo, he says, my name a prayer on his lips. I open my eyes. His are dark, his pupils blown wide. The fierce control is gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded vulnerability that mirrors my own. Don't run, he says, his voice barely a whisper. Not from this. I can only shake my head, because words are beyond me. Run? I feel like I've been running my whole life, and I've just finally found a place to stop. The next morning was a study in exquisite torture. I woke up in my own bed, alone, the scent of him a phantom on my pillows. The house was silent. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd dreamed it all, that the intensity of my own longing had finally conjured a full-blown hallucination. Then I saw his hat on the kitchen counter, right next to the coffee maker. He was here. He hadn't left. I found him on the porch, a steaming mug cradled in his hands, staring out at the mountains. He was dressed for work, his shoulders set in their usual stoic line. He didn't turn when I stepped out, but I knew he'd heard me. The air was cool and crisp, smelling of damp earth and pine. The silence stretched, and with every passing second, my anxiety grew, a cold, creeping vine. He regretted it. It was a moment of madness, a fluke brought on by adrenaline and proximity. I had ruined everything. Our easy, if tense, working relationship was shattered. I cleared my throat, the sound ridiculously loud in the morning quiet. Coffee's ready, I said, my voice stiff and unnatural. He took a slow sip from his mug before finally turning his head to look at me. His expression was unreadable, his eyes shadowed by the brim of his hat. My stomach plummeted. This was it. The polite but firm rejection. The conversation about professionalism and boundaries. I opened my mouth to say something. An apology, a joke, anything to break the unbearable tension, but he spoke first. I woke up this morning, he began, his voice low and steady. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was just taking care of your father's place. He paused, his gaze holding mine. I felt like I was home. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees felt weak. It wasn't a rejection. It was a confession, a reassurance. It was everything. He stood up and closed the distance between us. He didn't kiss me. He just reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His palm was warm and calloused, a familiar, comforting weight. It was a simple gesture, but it felt more intimate, more binding than the kiss in the barn. It was a promise made in the clear light of day. We have a lot to figure out, he said, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. I'm not selling, I said, the words rushing out of me, a decision that had just solidified in my heart. I'm staying. A slow smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes and making them crinkle at the corners. It was the smile I'd seen in the barn, the one that changed everything. Good, he said, because I wasn't planning on leaving. The days that followed were a quiet navigation of a new world. There was an awkwardness, a shyness we had to work through. We were two men who were used to our solitude, suddenly trying to learn the shape of each other. But underneath the fumbling attempts at conversation and the hesitant glances, there was a deep, thrumming current of rightness. Our intimacy was built in small moments. In him teaching me how to properly cinch a saddle, his hands covering mine, his instructions a low murmur in my ear. In me reading a passage from my book out loud to him on the porch one evening, his quiet attention a form of validation I hadn't realized I craved. In the simple domesticity of making dinner together, bumping hips in the small kitchen, moving in a new kind of dance, one of partnership instead of avoidance. There were still fears. My own internal chorus of self-doubt hadn't been entirely silenced. I still felt like an imposter sometimes, a city boy playing at being a rancher. I worried that he would tire of my incompetence, that the reality of me would fall short of whatever he had imagined. The town was small, and I saw the curious glances when we went to the feed store together. We were a puzzle they were trying to solve. The potential for judgment hung in the air, a test of our new, fragile connection. One evening, a week after the kiss, I was wrestling with these fears, sitting on the porch steps, watching him work with a young horse in the round pen. The setting sun cast him in silhouette, a figure of impossible competence and grace. The gulf between us felt immense. As if sensing my turmoil, he finished with the horse, gave it a final pat, and walked over to me. He didn't sit, just stood in front of me, blocking my view of the sunset. "Your head's loud tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. I gave a weak, humorless laugh. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to me," he said. He hunkered down, so we were at eye level. "What is it, Leo?" I looked at his hands, resting on his knees. Strong, capable hands that knew how to fix an engine, deliver a foal, and hold me like I was something precious. "I'm scared, Cole," I admitted, the words tasting like rust. "I'm scared this is a mistake. That you'll wake up one day and realize you've saddled yourself with a guy who doesn't even know how to hammer a nail straight." He was silent for a long moment, his expression serious. He reached out and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His touch was grounding, chasing away the frantic energy of my thoughts. "I know exactly who you are," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "I know you're smart, and you're kind, and you feel things so deeply you try to hide them from the world. I don't need you to know how to fix a fence. That's my job. Your job." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Your job is to be here, to let me see you. That's all." He leaned in and gave me a soft, chaste kiss. It was a kiss of reassurance, of profound acceptance. It wasn't about passion, it was about safety. In that moment, I understood. He wasn't in love with an idea of me. He saw all my broken, clumsy, anxious pieces, and he wasn't running. He was staying. Tonight, we are sitting on that same porch. A comfortable silence stretches between us, punctuated by the chirping of crickets. My chair is pulled close to his, our shoulders brushing. A half-empty bottle of beer rests on the railing beside me. He's staring out at the stars, which are scattered like diamond dust across the black velvet sky. I think back to the man who arrived here 6 weeks ago, a ghost in his own life, planning his escape. He wouldn't recognize the person I am now. I still have my anxieties, my moments of doubt, but they no longer have the same power over me. They are quieted by the steady presence of the man beside me. He turns his head, and even in the dim light from the kitchen window, I can see the softness in his eyes. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. He just reaches over and takes my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. The fit is perfect. It feels like it was always meant to be this way. My father's ranch no longer feels like a burden. It feels like a gift. It's a place of hard work and harsh beauty, a place of endings and new beginnings. I came here to close a chapter of my life, to sell off the last remnants of a past I felt disconnected from. Instead, I found a future I never dared to imagine. I found a home. I found him. And as I sit here, our hands clasped together in the quiet dark, I feel a profound sense of peace settle over me. I am steady. At last.